about taking up knitting, and I'm so pleased the young are doing it. You knit wool, and wool is warm. And if we all took up knitting wool, we'll be all well insulated in winter. So I highly recommend the young do that.
Right. Jenna...
and do interesting things with it.
Have you ever tried macrame?
I actually have. Macrame some plant holders for my house. And I'm a bit of a crocheter as well.
Yeah. A person called Peter just emailed, said, I'll give you an indication of just how cool knitting has become, Jenna. Finland hosts the Heavy Metal Knitting World Championship.
That is amazing. I want to go to that.
So would you recommend people out there listening to this, would you recommend people to give it a go? Is it actually something that you say it's once you learn to do it, it's easy as riding a bike, but actually is it a cool hobby? Is it fun to do?
It's really fun to do, and I tell you what, try not to learn off a person, learn off YouTube. Now that YouTube's there, you just type in what stitch you want to do, put slow in the stitch, slow knit, slow purl, and you can just do it really easily by just watching that over and over again. You don't feel like you're taking up someone's time. And my other piece of advice is start again if you make a mistake, or try and fix the mistake, otherwise you'll never wear it. So just think about the process of doing it as well. That's a joy, and getting it right is a joy too.
Finally, I noticed online on social media you had knitted a little monkey, which looked quite gorgeous, but also quite difficult to do.
Yeah, I'm 34, and all my friends are having babies, so I always knit the wee ones a little toy. And the monkey is, and I just got a really good feedback from a friend the other day. I knitted a unicorn, and she told me her daughters called it Horny.
All right, good on you. Jenna Todd, thank you very much for being with us on that. I'm just looking, so because you grew up in Fiji, didn't you, Nalini?
Pardon?
You grew up in Fiji.
I did, yes.
And I'm just so it wasn't the knitting culture in Fiji. What would have been what would have been a similar thing to knitting?
Well, I honestly, I do remember doing macrame. I do remember making pot plant holders for my mum because it was... I'm trying to remember the little flower that we used to grow, that you could just pick a leaf and grow it from the stem. The stem would sprout really quickly, and then, would put them in these little pots and hang them by the macrame holders. And the competition was to see who could use the most number of colours and, make sort of designs out of it. So, and I really don't know why it died, because, it was quite a fun thing to do. But no, knitting certainly wasn't it. No reason why I shouldn't take it up now, because it's something maybe I could do sitting in the olive grove. But Wallace, New Zealand's doing some good, interesting knitwear. I'm seeing more and more in stores, and I won't name the brands, but I'm wearing one of them right now, where it sort of has half a sleeve missing, but it looks it looks like a shawl, but when you look at it from the other side of the garment, it actually looks like a top. So
Jan says
we could do those sort of things.
Jan says knitting is therapeutic. Knitting is quite a bit of response to this. Wool keeps its thermal properties even when wet, unlike man-made materials.
That's right.
Nalini Baruch and Selwyn Manning, thank you so much for your time today on the panel.
Thank you.
I'm Wallace Chapman, back tomorrow for Friday's show, 3:45. See you then. Checkpoint next.
Whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. E haere nei, the government admits to another whoops over the man who did a runner from an Auckland isolation hotel. From tomorrow, police will be on guard 24/7 outside all facilities, but the union reckons it smacks of politics and could make us less safe and not more. Almost 28,000 people have made it through managed isolation or quarantine, so what are they doing now? A tough day for Southland. More than 2,500 jobs will go with the Tiwai smelter, but is there a silver lining? And millions of dollars is doled out for an Auckland jobs program, but with 1,200 more people on the benefit this week, is it enough? We go job hunting. And Winston Peters, no story, straight to bed. RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, ko Susana Leia tawa tēnei. Southland is reeling from the impending closure of the Tiwai Point aluminium smelter, a major source of employment in the region for nearly 50 years. The plant's majority owner, Rio Tinto, announced this morning that the business is no longer viable because of high power prices and will close in August next year. The chair of the Southland Chamber of Commerce, Neil Makara, says the government needs to improve transmission and power prices so Rio Tinto doesn't pull out.
Well, it has to be Southland's number one priority. There's no point in trying to go out and create more jobs when the potential of losing that fundamental number is at risk, and why the central government wouldn't engage with local business leaders to further discuss that. We're hopeful that they will.
Neil Makara. Invercargill residents are particularly shocked by the news because almost everyone in the city has some tie to the smelter, which employs about 1,000 people directly and 1,600 indirectly. Business owner Andrew Holden says the loss of high-paid jobs and disposable income will be devastating.
I think it's going to be tough for those staff to get jobs that are going to be paid the same sort of wages as they're getting at the moment. There's going to be a few professional guys that have trades that perhaps can go to Frontier or some of the other firms, but I think it's going to be difficult to replace them, I really do.
An Invercargill business owner, Andrew Holden. The government says there is no standard plan for what businesses should do when a person possibly infected with COVID-19 enters their premises. A man who escaped from an isolation hotel in central Auckland on Tuesday night spent some time in a Countdown supermarket before testing positive for COVID-19 the next day. Countdown closed the store for deep cleaning after reviewing CCTV footage with the police, but did not receive advice that night from the Ministry of Health. The Minister in charge of isolation facilities, Megan Woods, says this will be looked into.
There needs to be a standard operating procedure that brings together within minutes all of the key players. That is absolutely something that needs to happen.
Megan Woods. The United States has again broken the record for the number of new daily cases of COVID-19. The 60,020 cases are the most reported by any country in a single day. This from our World Watch reporter Max Toll.
The latest increase takes the total of US cases past 3 million. Infections are on the rise in 42 of the 50 states, according to a Reuters analysis. Most of the new cases are in southern and western states like Texas and Florida, where hospitals are struggling to cope. Despite this, the White House wants to move forward on relaxing some restrictions. Meanwhile, another bleak milestone has been reached globally, 12 million total cases. This is Max Toll.
The government is reviewing its extradition arrangements with Hong Kong in light of the new security law imposed by China on the territory. The Foreign Minister, Winston Peters, says the legislation has fundamentally changed the environment for international engagement there. The National Party has unveiled what its leader calls its first big economic announcement. Called National's Plan to Get New Zealand Working, it outlines 5 themes for post-COVID recovery: responsible economic management, delivery infrastructure, retraining the workforce, a greener, smarter future, and building stronger communities. The plan was unveiled by Todd Muller in Christchurch this afternoon.
National has a plan to rebuild our communities and our economy, to get Kiwis back to work, and to deal with the economics and job crisis that sits in front of us as a country.
Todd Muller says exact details of the party's economic policy will be announced in September, 17 days before the election. And just to hand, the police have found one of the 2 teenagers who escaped from a youth justice facility in Auckland at the weekend. 16-year-old Hami Hanara was seen in the Woody area this afternoon and taken into custody after a short chase on foot. The police are still searching for 17-year-old Sean Ratu, who escaped at the same time. It's coming up to 4.5 minutes past 5. The Blues have steered away from playing mind games and excluded former All Black Dan Carter from their lineup to play the Crusaders in Saturday night's Super Rugby Aotearoa match in Christchurch. While the sight of Carter in a Blues jersey might have been hard for Crusaders fans to swallow, his return to the field is eagerly anticipated by rugby fans. Carter signed with the Blues last month as injury cover, but is yet to make his debut for the franchise and hasn't been named in the squad for the top-of-the-table clash against the Crusaders, the team he won 3 Super Rugby titles with. But Blues coach Leon MacDonald has avoided the temptation to play mind games with the Crusaders and include Carter, who was back in Canterbury last weekend playing club rugby for Southbridge.
The All-White striker Chris Wood has chalked up a century of English Premier League football appearances, coming off the bench to help Burnley beat West Ham 1-0 in London. The win moves Burnley up to 9th. Champions Liverpool beat Brighton 3-1. Gold Coast has reportedly offered Brisbane forward David Fifita an NRL record deal of $1.3 million a season after he rejected their initial offer of $1.2 million. And in the US, Amazon will remove Washington Redskins merchandise for sale while the NFL team considers a name change. That's the news.
Closing down Tiwai Point.
Terminating the power agreement has never been done before, but merely means that we're now on the path to winding down operations.
Escaping isolation. The public is not pleased.
Some of the language that people use, I can't repeat on the radio. People are very angry.
And Waimate residents hop at the chance to try a wallaby pie.
Should be a good night out.
It'll be a jumping night.
We're bouncing off the walls.
Yeah.
I just had a wallaby pie for breakfast this morning. It was pretty tasty.
Leaping into the day, Morning Report, weekdays from 6 on air and online.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland and Auckland mainly fine. A few showers in Northland, spreading to Auckland tomorrow afternoon. Coromandel Peninsula, Waikato and Bay of Plenty south to Manawatu, also Gisborne and Hawke's Bay. Mainly fine, a few showers about Taihape and Mahia Peninsula tonight. Frost tomorrow morning. Horowhenua, Kapiti Coast, Wellington and Wairarapa, showers today, fine tomorrow. Nelson, Bulla and Westland fine with frost tomorrow morning. Then cloudy periods about Bulla and Westland from tomorrow afternoon. For Marlborough and Canterbury, partly cloudy, a few showers about Banks Peninsula, clearing this evening. Fine weather tomorrow with a frosty start. Otago, Southland and Fiordland areas of cloud, light showers in parts of Clutha, Southland and Fiordland. Morning frosts for inland Otago. Chatham Islands, showers. RNZ National, it's 7 minutes past 5.
Thanks, Susanna, and welcome to Checkpoint. I'm Lisa Owen. The government's admitted another gap in its public health defences. There's no standard plan for businesses should they come in contact with a possible COVID-19 case. The gaping hole in the system has been brought to light after a man absconded from an isolation hotel in Auckland and shopped at a CBD supermarket. He was later found to be COVID-19 positive. Meanwhile, the government is also beefing up security at hotels now that 2 people have managed to leave without permission. Here's political reporter Charlie Drever.
The minister in charge of the country's 28 isolation facilities, Megan Woods, says those who leave hotels illegally will face the full weight of the law.
They are putting New Zealanders at risk and undermining our efforts to keep COVID out of the community. Frankly, they don't deserve to join the team of 5 million.
But while Megan Woods is crystal clear on escapees, advice on what businesses should do with a possible COVID-19 case is as clear as mud. Countdown Supermarket on Auckland's Victoria Street closed its doors Tuesday night after a man left the Stanford Plaza and spent 20 minutes shopping, snapping selfies and browsing male grooming products. First Union retail organiser, Robin Wilson-Whiting, says it's a flashback for those union members who worked during the lockdown, but they are satisfied with Countdown's response.
The group of workers that were working on Tuesday night have been isolated and are getting tested and are paid for the duration until they return a negative test.
Today it was confirmed police arrived at the supermarket at 9:30 p.m. on Tuesday and a decision was made to wipe down all surfaces at 10:30 p.m. But missing from action in all this was the Ministry of Health.
The advice we have, the conversations that were had with the supermarket on Tuesday evening, is that there was a joint review between police and the Countdown to ascertain what areas the abscondee had been in, what areas needed to be clean, but there was not an instruction to close, is my understanding. But we will put that question to the Ministry of Health.
It was also revealed the store was briefly reopened yesterday by mistake after a deep clean had been completed. Megan Woods admitted there should be a clear plan in place for businesses.
So there needs to be a standard operating procedure that brings together within minutes all of the key players. That is absolutely something that needs to happen.
But in the meantime, the decision has been made to boost security at hotels. Air Commodore Digby Webb says there are currently contracted guards on site who work with police.
The police have already committed significant resources to support managed isolation and quarantine with dedicated patrols assigned to facilities and a 24/7 presence at a small number of facilities and the Jet Park quarantine facility. Since my update yesterday, the police have agreed to have a uniformed officer on site at each managed isolation facility 24/7.
National leader Todd Muller is on board with the decision. He says bringing the police in will toughen up quarantine and isolation.
From my perspective, if you'd managed the process tightly and with competency, I suspect there would have been less examples of people wanting to abscond. The thing has felt loose and sloppy and clumsy all the way through.
The man escaped via the smoking area by leaving through a section of external fencing that was being replaced. Digby Webb says 6-foot fencing is now in place, but they will not ban smoking at facilities after considering it yesterday.
There is strong health advice that effectively forcing someone to quit smoking while already in a heightened state of stress is likely to lead to an increase in that stress and aggressive behaviour.
While holes in the system are being plugged, people who've applied for exemptions have been left in limbo. Megan Woods says work is still underway.
A COVID-19 exemption compliance team within MB is being established and a strengthened assessment process is being put in place.
An updated air border order will be in place next week, which will include a system for those applying for exemptions. From Parliament, Ko Charlie Drever, DNA.
And the police union is warning having a uniformed officer on guard outside all isolation and quarantine facilities 24/7 could actually make New Zealand less safe, not more. I asked Police Association boss Chris Cahill what the problem is with the new security plan.
Well, I just don't believe it's the best use of police resources. These are police officers that will have to come off the front line, and you're not talking one or two. Across all the quarantine facilities, it's probably going to take somewhere between 150 and 200 police officers. Police need to be on the front line of policing, looking after your family harm incidents, your mental health crises, your dangerous drivers, those sorts of things. This is a job that can be done by aviation security staff, customs staff, immigration staff, those people that aren't fully utilised due to COVID issues that have created at the border. And policing can be called in when there is a significant issue of someone not following the rules. But we've only seen 2 people that appear to have breached those rules. So it's not an issue of having all these officers standing around waiting for that to happen.
Aren't you the best people to keep the country safe, though? Isn't that what you do?
Well, there's 400 military personnel deployed to this operation as well. And it's not like you've got a mass number of people refusing to remain in quarantine. The vast majority are following the rules and staying there. It's only 1 or 2, and police can attend those incidents. But having police sitting at these quarantine facilities waiting for the 1 or 2 who don't obey the rules is not a good use of those police resources.
You did do this kind of thing after the mosque shootings for reassurance. You posted police 24/7 outside various institutions around the country. So why not now?
Well, that was quite different. That was to give people a reassurance against a danger of people with firearms or other threats to those communities. And that is clearly a police role. And the idea of bringing military in to do that police role is different than actually bringing police officers in to do what is essentially a health role. It's not a police role. These people aren't in prison. They aren't captives. They're following rules under the Health Act and acts made around that. So it's quite a different scenario.
So if it's not about safety, then what do you think it is about wanting to have a police officer there 24/7?
Well, I think there's a degree of making it look that politicians are doing the utmost they can, and I understand that. And New Zealanders want the utmost to be done, but I don't believe that requires 24/7 police presence. The suitably trained staff that be given the powers by the Director General of Health from the likes of aviation security, customs, immigration, that could do just as good a job, and defence.
So are you being dragged into a political situation rather than a policing situation, do you think?
Well, I think there's an element of that, and I think needs to be really clear that that isn't what police should be doing. If there was a clear evidence that police powers were required regularly because people were trying to break the quarantine rules, that would be understandable. But there's no evidence supporting that. One or two people, and even then one of those would suggest they just walked off due to not a clear understanding of what was going on. There is plenty of other options that are available to be deployed, and in fact already are being deployed, given there's 400 military personnel are actually deployed. Give them the powers, which I believe can be done by the Director General of Health.
Well, are they up to the job? Because they've had 2 runners.
I think you have to be realistic. 2 runners out of thousands of people that have gone into quarantine isn't a great number. And, my information is only one of those was probably deliberate, the other one was ignorance. So it's just making sure there's proper security around those by the military personnel, or, as I say, aviation security, could prevent that as it was.
With your estimates at being around, the 200 mark, if you're having a police officer outside these facilities 24/7, can you give us a little bit of perspective? How much resource is that compared to other things that you might do?
We've got police districts that don't have many more than 200, 150 sworn staff. So some of our smaller police districts. So it's a significant number. It's certainly not a core policing role.
Is this going to put pressure on your resources?
Oh, very much so. I mean, as simple as this, there will not be cops available to attend family harm incidents, to attend burglaries, to be on the roads patrolling for dangerous drivers. They have to come from somewhere, and that's the front line.
That suggests we're going to be less safe as a consequence of this.
That's a distinct possibility, and that's why I think it needs to be really looked at as to, every agency has an issue around how you deploy your resources and trying to prioritise things. I struggle to see this as a priority for police.
Are you talking to anyone about it? Going to talk to the Minister?
I've unfortunately missed the Minister today. I've spoken to the Police Commissioner about it. He's clear on my views, but he again has to deal with a variety of different perspectives as well. But yes, I will attempt to talk to the Minister about it.
So are you in essence being deployed for a feel-good factor, to have a uniformed officer out the front and for political cover?
Well, I think there's certainly an element of a feel-good factor. And the reality is that the best priority, to feel good, if it doesn't actually have a dramatic change on the security of those facilities. And I don't believe it does.
And that was the head of the Police Association, Chris Cahill. It is 18 minutes past 5 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm keen for your feedback on that. Do you think that it's a pragmatic move to put a police officer outside these facilities 24/7, or is it a political move to be seen to be doing everything you can? Chris Cahill says it's not a great use of resources. What do you reckon? You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Southlanders have been thrown into turmoil with Rio Tinto's announcement today it will wind down the Tiwai Point aluminium smelter, resulting in the direct loss of almost 1,000 jobs and another 1,600 associated jobs. The company's review of the business found it's no longer viable due to high energy costs and a difficult future. Our Otago Southland reporter Timothy Brown is in Southland and has more.
The news is reverberating around Southland and across the country. The region's economy is so intertwined with Tiwai Point, there's very few businesses that won't see some kind of impact. That's why Southland Chamber of Commerce Chair Neil Makara is hitting out at the government.
There's something like 90 million of wages paid out from the smelter annually to employees, and something like 450 million into the economy. So on a small economy like Southland, that is a devastating blow. So I'm not sure why central government wouldn't engage around having a discussion on how we might protect those.
The smelter provides a lot of high-paying jobs in the deep south, but it's the spin-offs of those wages leaving the area that has others, like business owner Andrew Holden, worried.
I think it's going to be huge on the economic impact on the area. You know, there's a lot of guys get employed. They're high-paid staff, and they have a lot of disposable income. And we're a local shop owner in town. I think it's going to have a lot of impact on us.
These Invercargill locals are devastated.
the smelter is the lifeblood of Invercargill, I think.
I'm saddened to hear that because it will affect so many businesses.
It forms a large portion of the income in the city, and there's a lot of contractors and employees which will be devastated for that.
The National Party leader, Todd Muller, is also laying the closure at the feet of the government.
The key issue here is that they have been working with them, one assumes, over the period of the last 3 years. They haven't been able to reach agreement. That's the prerogative of the government. But what's the plan? There seems to be no plan from the Finance Minister apart from see you later, and that's a shame, Southland.
But the Finance Minister, Grant Robertson, has batted back any suggestion the government is to blame.
There is a certain sense of inevitability about today's announcement. Rio Tinto have been trying to sell Tiwai Point for about 10 years now. In 2013, the then Minister of Finance, Bill English, made very clear to Rio Tinto there would be no further government subsidies. And we, as a government, have backed what Bill English and John Key had previously said to them.
And Energy Minister Megan Woods says the government support provided to Rio Tinto is significant.
The recently released transmission pricing methodology would result in the smelter paying $10 million less a year from 2023 in their transmission pricing. And then, of course, there is also the very large emissions trading scheme subsidy that the smelter receives of $48 million a year.
The smelter's nearest neighbour, Bluff, is deeply divided on the subject. Many, most of whom wouldn't speak on tape or provide their names, are pleased to see it go.
I'm stoked. I know it's going to mean a lot of job loss for people around Southland, and that's shit, but it can definitely be made up other places, and I'm happy to see it go.
Locals estimate only about 24 Bluff residents work directly for the smelter, and though other industries will suffer, they are more concerned about the environment. Rio Tinto has given Meridian Energy notice to terminate its power contract, and it's expected the smelter will close in August next year. In Southland, for Checkpoint, Timothy Brown.
A young man who was humble, kind and had a bright future ahead of him. That's how Constable Matthew Hunt has been described as he was farewelled by hundreds of his family, friends and colleagues at an emotional service at Auckland's Eden Park. The 28-year-old police officer was shot dead during a traffic stop last month in the West Auckland suburb of Massey. The funeral had been delayed because some of his family had come from overseas and had to spend 2 weeks in managed isolation. Our reporter Sarah Robson and visual journalist Dan Cook filed this story.
The hearse carrying Constable Matthew Hunt's body arrived at Eden Park this morning, escorted by a police motorcade and a flyover by the Police Eagle helicopter. As well as Mr Hunt's family and friends, hundreds of police officers in their formal uniforms filed into the stadium for the service. The Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern, the Police Minister Stuart Nash, the MP for Rodney, Nationals Mark Mitchell and the Auckland Mayor Phil Goff were also in attendance. The Police Commissioner Andrew Costa said Mr Hunt was an ordinary person doing extraordinary things.
Part of the satisfaction of policing lies in dealing with the unexpected. However, the unexpected also makes our job inherently dangerous. In 1963, the minister at another police funeral said, "We're reminded there's a price to be paid for upholding the law. We're not always mindful of how much the police are required to give." On 19 June, we saw the terrible truth of these words. We are appalled by the senseless taking of a young life and the sort of circumstances which keep us awake at night.
Sergeant Dean Taylor was Mr Hunt's supervisor for 2 years at the Orewa police station.
Although at that time Matt was the junior member of the team, he stood out. Matt was a humble guy and wouldn't want this fuss. However, Matt, on this occasion, you deserve all of this.
Dean Taylor said Mr Hunt was calm, methodical and wanted to learn, and he was eager to start his detective training when the time was right. Mr Taylor said after a family harm incident, Mr Hunt would always insist on finishing his reports at the beach.
Matt loved taking in the view, and he had his favourite places in most of the areas that we cover, such as Red Beach, Snells Beach. but really any beach would do.
Dean Taylor said Mr Hunt was always very particular about his appearance, even getting his uniform trousers tailored for a sharper look. And that won him a legion of female fans out on the beat.
There were some of our regular female clients who appeared to be quite taken with Matt and his eye-catching, neat appearance. On one occasion, one of these females boasted of how she had recently done her eyebrows for Matt. Another one used to say, "Hi Matt," as she batted her eyelashes at him. Her partner wasn't too pleased and kept asking, "Which one of you is Matt?" every time the section dealt with him.
One of Mr Hunt's longtime friends and former flatmate, Shane McLennan, said they loved going out for dumplings and one of their favourite spots was Eden noodles. At home, they also started sampling different hot sauces.
We started off pretty mild, working our way up to some of the hottest chilies in the world. I remember one day Matt brought a bottle home and for some reason we thought our taste buds were immune to it. It was one of the hottest chilies you can buy. But Matt decided to have a teaspoon of it anyway. I guess just to try it out. Well, within about 30 seconds, he was out on the deck with his shirt off, a bottle of milk in his hand, tears streaming down his face and asking for his mum. To this day, the bottle of hot sauce is in our fridge and doesn't get used.
Another friend, Regan Green, said Mr Hunt was more like a brother than a best friend.
He was an amazing human being and without effort touched so many lives. Matt was often quiet, but those who knew him best knew whenever he did say something, it was worth listening to. He was an intelligent, happy and determined man who was all in once he had his mind set on something.
Mr Hunt's mother, Diane, said from a very young age her son had wanted to join the police.
It never wavered, and Matthew found his forever family with the police. It was a perfect fit for him.
And Diane Hunt had this to say about her eldest child.
We saw you, Matthew. Those who love you saw behind your veil of humility, and we saw the calibre of the man you were destined to become. I love you, Matthew, now and forever. Every day, in every way, you made me so, so proud to be your mum.
After the funeral service, out on the pitch at Eden Park, the Police Commissioner Andrew Costa presented Mr Hunt's mother and sister with the police flag. Hundreds of officers then performed the police haka, ko te uru ponamu. Police officers lined up around the pitch, forming a guard of honour as the hearse made its way slowly around the perimeter, followed by Mr Hunt's family. The 24-year-old man who has been charged with murdering Mr Hunt appeared in court yesterday. He has entered a not guilty plea and will stand trial in July next year. A 30-year-old woman will also go to trial charged with being an accessory. Mō te hōtaka o te ahi, ko Sarah Robson, aho.
The Deputy Prime Minister, Winston Peters, has had a successful, albeit unexpected, surgery this morning and is now recuperating at home. The 75-year-old visited the doctor earlier this week after experiencing what's been described as food poisoning symptoms and dehydration. We cross now to our political reporter, Joe Moyer at Parliament. Hi, Joe. What do we know about this surgery? Because Winston Peters is particularly private, isn't he?
Yes, he is, Lisa. So what we know is that as those symptoms that you expressed, he went and saw the doctor. He was advised that he needed a surgical procedure. Now, this is quite convenient in the sense that we are in a 2-week recess at the moment, so the timing is quite good. However, obviously to have surgery so quickly, you would expect that it was probably reasonably serious as well. Now, what he had done this morning was a keyhole surgery, and he's now back home recuperating. Now, of course, this is not his first medical event either. Last year, you'll recall that Mr Peters took a 4-week break after quite a serious operation. Now, at the time back then, he said, I went into hospital for a serious operation, I got an infection, and that's what set me back so far, which is why he ended up having a lot more time off than he'd expected. He was asked about that operation later when he returned to Parliament, and at the time, Mr Peters told reporters it was a private matter.
So why do you think he's even given out any details this time, Joe?
Well, it is interesting because we've had not one but two statements from him this time. So this morning we got told that he was having the surgery and he was confident that he would return to work quickly. He pointed out that he wanted to be, campaign fighting fit for the election, which he said is typically physically gruelling, and that this was an unexpected medical event and, of course, unexpected timing, but he was taking doctor's orders and needed to do it. Now, the second statement came out saying that he'd survived the surgery, which I guess you could see as a bit of a proof of life statement. That statement also went on to thank everyone who had sent kind words and well wishes. Now, we have actually had a third statement just in the last half an hour from Mr. Peters. Now, this one is in his capacity as the Foreign Affairs Minister. So what I can tell you about that is that he's announced on behalf of the government that New Zealand is reviewing the settings of its relationship with Hong Kong. Now, this is a quote from Mr. Peters. He says, China's decision to pass that new national security law for Hong Kong has fundamentally changed the environment for international engagement there. New Zealand remains deeply concerned at the imposition of this legislation on Hong Kong. So government officials have been directed to review policy settings around that relationship with Hong Kong. Mr. Peters says this will be a deliberate, considered review across all settings. Now, that includes extradition arrangements, controls on exports of strategic goods and travel advice. And just on that travel advice, I can also tell you that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs advice to New Zealanders in Hong Kong has been updated today as well. And it warns Kiwis living in Hong Kong that they face increased risk of arrest.
Interesting. So he is still, commanding big decisions from his sick bed. So given that, do we think that this is going to have any effect on his campaign plans?
Yeah, I mean, it's not great timing because he was meant to be in Whangarei this weekend for the party's big campaign launch. Now, I understand that the bus from the 2017 election with Winston Peters' face plastered on the side of it is going to be back. That was going to be taking place in Whangarei, huge campaign launch. Obviously, he's not going to be well enough to do that now. They do, however, have their annual convention general meeting in Auckland, not this weekend, but next, the following weekend. So they're just going to put the two together, have the campaign launch and the AGM at the same time. And in the meantime, this weekend, it will just be a much smaller affair without Winston Peters. Shane Jones will be there and they'll launch their Northland campaign.
Thanks for the update, Jo. That's Jo Moyer joining us live from Parliament there. And coming up on Checkpoint on RNZ National, the multi-million-dollar boost to get 700 more people into work in Auckland. National outlines its economic plan, but don't expect the details just yet. They're still coming. And flying home amid a global pandemic, why thousands of Kiwis decided New Zealand is the best place to be. We'd love your feedback on anything you've heard on the program this evening. Let us know what you think of the police being deployed outside isolation facilities. Their union says that'll be about 200 officers and a scarce resource that will be used in something they don't think is a priority. What do you make of that? You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. We'd also love to hear from you if you're affected by the closure announced for the Tiwai smelter too. It is time now, though, for the headlines with Susanna.
The government has admitted there's no standard plan for businesses should they come into contact with a possible COVID-19 case. A man who escaped from an Auckland isolation facility on Tuesday night spent some time in a Countdown supermarket before testing positive the next day. The minister in charge of quarantine, Megan Woods, says a standard operating procedure is needed. From today, there will be a permanent police presence at all isolation facilities. However, the Police Association President, Chris Cahill, says that's not a good use of resources because it will take officers away from the front line. Southland is reeling from the impending closure of the Tiwai Point aluminium smelter, a major source of employment in the region for nearly 50 years. Invercargill residents are particularly shocked because almost everyone in the city has some tie to the smelter, which employs about 1,000 people directly and 1,600 indirectly. The government is reviewing its extradition arrangements with Hong Kong in light of the new security law imposed by China on the territory. The Foreign Minister Winston Peters says the legislation has fundamentally changed the environment for international engagement there. The Ombudsman's Office has found the Health Ministry was unaware of 30 deaths of people with intellectual disabilities in its care over a 2.5-year period. The Chief Ombudsman, Peter Bosher, says some people with intellectual disabilities could be suffering premature or avoidable deaths. The police have found one of the 2 teenagers who escaped from a youth justice facility in Auckland at the weekend. They say 16-year-old Hami Hanara was seen in the Wiri area this afternoon and taken into custody after a short chase on foot. He'll appear in the Manukau Youth Court tomorrow, charged with escaping from lawful custody. The police are still searching for 17-year-old Sean Ratu. Those are the latest headlines from RNZ National. Our next news and weather update is at 6.
Thanks, Susanna. Kia ora anō. This is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. Let's get down to the business news with Nona Peltier, who's joined me in the studio. Nona, I feel like you've got your fingers firmly on the pulse of business confidence. So, yet another report on this. What is it showing us?
Okay, this one is for the first week of July. So it's a preliminary report. ANZ do a larger report. This is why you seem to be thinking that you're hearing this more often. You actually are.
And we probably care more at the moment as well.
We do care a lot more, and this is for the first week of July, and it's showing there is an improvement.
Okay.
However, the outlook is grim in the extreme, let's just say. It's not a good outlook. And also, they suggest that the global outlook is even dire. So I wouldn't say this is a great big bounce, but it is an improvement from what we saw previously. So this is a good thing, right?
Okay, so tell us a bit about the outlook.
Okay, so, well, some of the better pieces in it. Okay, let's just focus on the better, right? So for when it comes to employment, a net 15% have expectations that they're not going to employ as many people, but that's better than 35% before. So this is, still negative, but all the negative numbers have improved somewhat. It's still pretty weak. And so we'll have to see what happens for the rest of the month. But for now, look, this is better than it was. We're expecting it to get worse, though, I think, with the recession still yet to really bite into our economy.
And I suppose with the wage subsidy not yet running out, that will come to an end in September. Okay, insolvencies. Gosh, it just keeps getting better, doesn't it? No, let's move on.
It's not a great wrap of the day, I'm afraid.
Okay, so expecting what? More insolvencies?
Well, after we just mentioned, picking up from what you said about the wage subsidy, well, from September, we're expecting, so this will be, it's expecting to be waves of insolvency that could actually go on for years. So the global financial crisis, now I didn't know this, but the global financial crisis saw companies that were affected by that. It took them 3 years before they finally actually went out of business. So they kind of lingered on and tried to get back, but they never did. So a 3-year term before some of those companies actually failed. In this case, there's an organization called the Restructuring, Insolvency and Turnaround Association that gave us a briefing yesterday, a whole bunch of business reporters. And one of the things they said was that they think that what's going to happen is it will come in waves. So the first wave will be in September, and it will be those companies that were already struggling heading into the lockdown. Mm-hmm. Those were the companies that had been affected, say, by exports to China or what have you. They were struggling already then. And then those other companies that were new. Yesterday we talked about one company, which was Me Today.
Yep.
Well, they're a new startup company with a brighter outlook, obviously, because they're still raising money and have a gung-ho attitude. But others that started just before the lockdown might not be doing as well, especially if they're not able to raise any money and they never got their feet off the ground to begin with. So those ones will be the first to suffer. Then later in the new year, we're expecting those companies that had pretty strong balance sheets to then sort of be taking a step back and saying, look, do we still have a business? And for example, the tourism industry, we can expect big hole there. He's suggesting that the tourism industry is going to be one that's really hard hit. And this could go on in waves for several years. So it's not a good outlook here, I'm afraid.
Great, thanks Nona for that. And also let's move on to the markets.
Just to really round it all off, isn't it? I'm so sorry to have to bring so much bad news today. That's right. Look, the NZX Top 50 Index, it dropped 2.25% today. That's a drop of 266 points to 11,441. I can say that's still a pretty good number, and considering what we saw today. So as a result of the Tiwai Point announcement, Contact Energy's share price fell 14%. Meridian's down 12%. Genesis Energy down 8%. Mercury down 3.5%. Little wonder our market dropped 2.25%. Other companies in the markdown were Trustpower, Vector, which is a lines company, and the port company at Bluff, Southport. That company, about a third of its cargo is the Tiwai smelter. But that doesn't necessarily translate into a loss of a third, because they do get a fee from Tiwai, which is going to run for at least, till 2043. And he didn't disclose what that fee is, but it definitely has some kind of an offsetting effect. So, yeah, not great news there either. And the New Zealand dollar, on the other hand, well, if these things matter to you, 65.8 US cents, so quite a bit stronger, but steady against the Australian at 94.2 and 52.1 British pence.
Thank you, Nona. That's Nona Peltier with our business wrap. And speaking of jobs, as Nona was, as jobless rates and redundancies rise amid the COVID fallout, a multi-million-dollar boost to an Auckland jobs program hopes to bring 700 more people into work. Another 1,200 people have gone on the job seeker benefit this week, with an extra 56,000 people accessing benefits since March. But the government's trying to stem that tide by giving more than $4 million to Auckland Council to help give people a foot in the door in jobs that they might otherwise miss out on. Our cameraman Nick Munro and reporter Nita Blake-Person filed this story.
The economic crash from COVID-19 has hit amid a building boom in Auckland, but filling jobs right now is risky. Heath Worsfold of landscape company Rural Design is one of the lucky ones. He's got plenty of planting work at the South Auckland development.
We're actually taking on more employees at the moment.
His company is part of the Auckland Council's Ngā Puna Pūkenga program, which the government today announced would get a $4.3 million boost.
Ngā Puna Pūkenga program gives us, in the initial part of the program, they were giving us $10,000 to take on someone, and then if we kept them for an extended period of time, we would get another $10,000. So it's definitely an incentive.
The program began as a pilot last year with 60 jobs. It's now going to fill another 700 spots over the next 12 months. 420 placements are for Māori, rangatahi, Pasifika, long-term unemployed and people not in education, employment or training. The rest are for people made redundant as a direct result of COVID-19. Auckland Mayor Phil Goff says the money goes directly to council, who then divvies it out to employers who sign up to be part of the program.
There's no time more important now than to help particularly those who are the most vulnerable in our workforce, or not in our workforce actually. These are often young people who are not in education, employment or training. And with COVID-19, we are creating, we're dealing with an even bigger problem. More people out of work, which means those that are the most disadvantaged find it even tougher to get into the workforce.
Rural Design crews are putting in hundreds of plants at the Awakiri wetlands. It's far from finished, but 15,000 people will eventually move into the new homes here, and there's plenty of work to be done.
Yes, this is about providing employment opportunities for young people, for people that may have been unemployed for a while, for people that may have been made redundant because of COVID. But it's also important to recognise that this is an amazing talent pool that MSD has access to.
Social Development Minister Carmel Cipollone is behind today's government funding and says it's about creating meaningful work.
They can start on minimum wage, but they can move up quite quickly to around $28 an hour. And from what I've been told, within 3 to 6 months, they can be up to $28 an hour. And so, particularly for our young people who may have been out of work and out of education and needing these opportunities, that's a really good starting point.
Minister Cipollone joined the crews planting today with 17-year-old Nathan Malafoy showing her the ropes.
So had you done anything like this before you took on this job?
No, but I work with Mum around the house, but that was it.
Nate was part of the Ngā Puna Pūkenga pilot and he's loving it.
I was in school, and couldn't find a job or anything like that, so lucky this program helped me through it and stuff, so got a job and before COVID hit and everything, so that was good, It's like a good job as well, because you're helping out the environment again and stuff like that.
His colleague Zane Takawo Phillips says he wouldn't want to do anything else.
Oh yeah, I wouldn't work inside ever again. I've had a couple of factory jobs and there's no way I'd look back. This is getting up early in the morning, seeing the light of day, it's just healing in some ways.
Another 8 workers will be joining their ranks thanks to today's funding, but elsewhere in the job market, Carmel Cipollone says things are uncertain.
We've had some weeks where we've had increases of, 200 on job seekers benefit. This week, I think it's around 1,200 increase. I think the maximum was around 6,000 that may have come, 7,000 that may have come on to benefit. Or in fact, I think early on there might have been 10,000 in 1 week that came on to benefit. So we are watching that space very carefully. We're being very responsive. MSD is working with those that become newly redundant as well to try and redeploy them into employment as quickly as possible.
The country's unemployment rate is currently at 4.2%, but with the wage subsidy scheme in place, the true effects of COVID on job losses aren't expected to be known until after September when it runs out. Carmel Cipollone says the 700 jobs being created through Ngā Puna Pukenga aren't the only ones the government is working on.
If this was the only project, then I would be quite worried, but it's not the only project. This is one project that demonstrates the government's commitment to creating jobs, providing pathways to upskilling and training, and working in partnership with crucial partners like Auckland Council to make that happen.
Today's boost, a chance to grow a greener future for the country while also growing job prospects. Mo te hōtaka o te ahi pōnei, ko Nita Blakeperson, aho.
So where are the jobs? Work and Income's job search site has around 750 current jobs listed, with more every day. And Trade Me says it saw an annual increase in job vacancies in June, with listings up 9%. So we sent Alex Perrottet job hunting.
Dairy farmers, forklift drivers, boat builders, therapists, telemarketers, landscapers, furniture removers and vineyard supervisors. They're all in demand. Up in Whangarei, Byron at Auto Pros a happy camper after finding an automotive technician. You filled the position?
Yes.
Oh, well done. When was that?
Monday.
Oh, good stuff. Was there a lot of interest?
Yep.
Oh, great. How many interviewees?
4.
Oh, okay, very good. And you think you got the right one?
I hope so.
Dinesh from Yogi's Haircut in Auckland City found his barber.
Same time I listed the Trade Me.
Right, and then they got in touch on Trade Me?
Yeah.
Okay, so would you say you had a lot of interest in the position?
Not very lots, but a few people say.
So you still got to choose someone?
Yeah.
And he's not the only one to find some luck through Trade Me. In Hamilton, Kathy runs cleaning company The Gleam Team. She was looking for a part-time cleaner but couldn't find anyone through the job search site.
I've had 2 applicants and none of them lived in the Waikato. They didn't have any experience.
Oh, gee, that's tough.
Yeah, it's a bit. But it's all good. I found staff somewhere else, so yeah, it's all good.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, but not through the Work and Income. Yeah, I actually used Trade Me this time. Yeah, had a heap of applicants. Not a lot of them could speak English, and that's one of the requirements.
Russell Phillips is the Director of Job Corp New Zealand and Automotive Employment New Zealand and says the motor industry has done far better than expected. But he says many see the current situation as a sugar rush and employers are afraid of what's to come.
What I'm seeing is companies making redundancies, based on the fear that a combination of the wage subsidy dropping off, a combination of the elections coming up, and also the potential of a very, very serious recession looming, is finding companies laying off workers regardless of the fact that that sales have come back up to, quite acceptable levels.
And he says the issue of matching skills with the jobs is a wider issue.
If that role was a sales development role, we would have upwards of 200 candidates. For a forklift mechanic's role, you might get 2. There's a massive disparity and a dreadful situation in some roles. Those roles, like that forklift mechanic's role, like the diesel mechanic's roles and petrol mechanic's roles, those roles will continue to be hard to fill.
Russell Phillips says that's not going to change with the borders closed, and Kiwis need to be ready to skill up. There's plenty of dairy farm jobs on the Work and Income job search site. Dairy New Zealand says there's 1,000 out there for ordinary Kiwis to snap up. Dairy New Zealand People team leader Jane Muir says it's a great time to give it a go.
It's a few more because of COVID and border restrictions and things, but this is a busy time of year on farms that often people are looking for jobs right now. And the dairy sector, because of the low unemployment rates, has been a little bit understaffed for a few years now.
And she says the good thing is you can pretty much learn on the job, and all you need are 3 things.
Attitude, reliability and willingness to learn. Anybody can have those skills. So how fast you progress depends how much you have those, and obviously if you have transferable skills you can progress quicker. But the key things are those 3, attitude, reliability and willingness to learn.
But if the gumboots and cowpats aren't your piece of cake, there's plenty of others. Colin from Sky High Scaffolding is advertising. If you're afraid of heights, don't worry, he wants a driver.
You know, like in this industry at the moment, there's quite a few people being laid off. I thought there would be a few more people applying than what there has been, to be honest. But yeah, not a huge response, but just, yeah, I've had a handful of people so far.
Right, OK. When you say handful, how many?
Like 3.
Sione in Wellington needs a plasterer.
I did manage to get one guy, and they just... This advertisement was put on Facebook by my partner, and so that's how we got in touch with him. But otherwise, in general, it's just so hard to find really good plasterers around here in Wellington.
And Jacob at Challenge Yachts in Avondale wants a marine technician, but you've got to have skills in at least 3 different trades.
I've been up on the Work and Income website for about a month now.
Right, and any bites?
I've had 6 people look at it, but absolutely 0 applications.
Oh, right. What do you put that down to?
I don't know if enough people know about the through Work and Income, the job listings. Yeah, it's a tough one to find the right people for the right person for the job. We're not sure where we're going.
So if you're not sure where you're going, well, there's plenty of options out there. For Checkpoint, Alex Perrottet.
It is 10 minutes to 6. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Keen for your feedback on anything you've heard on the program tonight. Have you been hunting for a job? What is the market like out there? Let us know. You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or send us an email, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. As the US surpasses 3 million coronavirus cases and 132,000 deaths, some states are seeing new daily cases top a staggering 10,000. Arizona, for instance, is seeing more than 1 in 4 tests come back positive. And at the top, the Trump administration continues to be in open dispute with the country's top health officials. Here's CNN's Nick Watt.
Today, the Vice President was big on platitudes.
The American people are finding a way to do their part,
but short on detail.
Just keep doing what you're doing.
Even though yesterday we hit a new one-day record for new cases. Again.
Just a few days ago, we were aghast that we'd hit 50,000. Without a national strategy and a roadmap, we'll quickly accelerate to 100,000 cases.
But the Vice President sees a silver lining.
We're actually seeing early indications of a percent of positive testing flattening in Arizona and Florida and Texas. In Arizona and Florida, we are beginning to see declining numbers of emergency room visits as well.
No mention of the full ICUs in 43 Florida hospitals or the just 145 ICU beds in Arizona currently unoccupied.
Our medical professionals are already feeling exhausted, asking for reinforcements, and they tell me the worst is yet to come.
The US has a little over 4% of the world's population, yet right now a little over 24% of the world's COVID-19 deaths. But the Vice President is upbeat.
We are encouraged that the average fatality rate continues to be low and steady.
Although the death toll is now starting to climb in Florida, Arizona and Texas, and in 8 states from sea to shining sea, record numbers now of COVID-19 patients in hospitals. Today, Dr. Deborah Birx asked everyone in surging spots basically to return to strict Phase 1 recommendations.
Asking the American people in those counties and in those states to not only use the face coverings, not going to bars, not going to indoor dining, but really not gathering in homes either.
And that report from CNN's Nick Watt. Nearly 28,000 returning Kiwis have gone through government-run managed isolation. That's on top of tens of thousands who flocked back into the country before the scheme came into force. So what on earth are all of those people doing now they're home? Our reporter Logan Church spent the day finding out.
Beth had just landed her dream job in London this year. She had been in the UK since last May.
It was working with a museum. So
quite a big museum in London, and yeah, it was going to be a summer casual role, but kind of like in a tour guide type position. Yeah, it was going to be really exciting.
So what happened?
And I got a call that was like, we can't take on summer casuals, we're not even sure if we're going to be open. Like, I'm so sorry. And so I was like, oh, okay, that's a big deal. That'll be fine. And then it was within 2 more days, I was like, there's no work in London, like London's going into lockdown. It was so quick. It was like a weekend.
By March, the situation in London was quickly deteriorating.
Friday evening, I was on the phone with my mum back in New Zealand, and she said, are you coming home? And I was like, why would I come home? Like, that doesn't make any sense. And then within 2 more days, I think we started getting more and more news about what was happening in London. And then I had a friend who actually got confirmed COVID positive test, I think on the Saturday or Sunday. And that's when I was like, okay, this is getting a lot more serious. And so, yeah, by the Monday we decided, I have to get home.
Beth managed to get back to New Zealand just before managed isolation facilities were put in place for all incoming passengers. She instead spent 2 weeks in quarantine in a room in her family's home in Tauranga. Perhaps not realising how long this pandemic would last, Beth left most of her stuff in London, only bringing over 1 suitcase of essentials.
I had a flight booked back for June 28th, so I was really just waiting until that. But by the time that flight came around, it became pretty apparent that I wasn't going back. The work situation in London was not great.
Beth stayed with her family and lived off savings until she realised she probably wouldn't be going back to London anytime soon. She is about to start a new job as a social worker next week.
The plan is to stick with the job for a while and just monitor the situation in London. I have a feeling London's going to be up and down for the next little while because their borders aren't shut, which is for obvious reasons. You can't really shut the borders to the UK or to London. So I'm going to monitor the situation, and when it becomes safer, I can reconsider.
Meanwhile, Laura is currently stuck in lockdown in Melbourne with a 4-month-old baby. She has lived there for 2 years and is trying to get back to New Zealand. She has a flight booked for the 27th of July. Upon arrival, they face 2 weeks in enforced isolation, along with thousands of other returning New Zealanders.
I'm a little bit nervous because babies can get jaundice and that type of thing if they don't see the sun, so I don't know how that's going to work. So I don't really know much about the whole hotel experience yet.
For Laura, New Zealand represents a far safer haven for her and her baby, even if it means leaving her Australian partner behind.
Doing so much better than everywhere else, I guess. I know it was hard for the economy, but it was obviously a necessary thing. And you guys have the protocols in place to stop that, community transmission. And the fact that you guys have got it under control shows that you guys did the right thing, I guess.
However, she doesn't plan to stay in New Zealand. She hopes to be back in Melbourne as soon as possible.
It's definitely a wait and see how it goes, yeah. Probably 3 to 4 weeks, hopefully.
How hopeful we can get back in 4 weeks?
Not very. It'll at least be 6 weeks after the leaving. So hopefully the quarantine here, the lockdown here has lifted because they have planned it to be a 6-week lockdown. So by that stage, it'll be a couple weeks after that I'll be returning.
Kate Katalinak has lived in San Francisco for 12 years. She works in marketing. When COVID came, she initially thought the city was handling it well.
At first, I was really happy with the response. It was very much like going hard and early. I felt really reassured that they put the city on a shelter order. We were all working from home. There were police lining the streets outside of, the supermarkets, post offices and pharmacies and things like that. And I felt good at first. And then when I realised that people were not going to comply and that people were much more concerned with turning it into a political issue, I realised how much I actually miss my family and the way things are run here.
Kate flew to New Zealand via LAX in mid-June, spending 2 weeks in isolation at the Waipuna Hotel and Conference Centre in Auckland, which she described as a great experience. Kate's also managed to keep her marketing job. Working from home worked well for the company and she can continue to do it from New Zealand, although she does have to go back at some point.
I've got a flexi flight, so I do have to go back at some point if I want to keep that job, which I do. But it is very much what you said. It's a wait and see. I originally had plans to go back in a couple of weeks, but I have been a little bit too impressed by the way things are running here and just realising that now's the time to be with loved ones. So I'll be extending the trip for sure.
Up to 1 million New Zealanders are based overseas. As of today, just over 27,700 have returned and gone through the government's managed isolation. For Checkpoint, Logan Church.
Lots of feedback from you all about police being posted outside isolation facilities. Paul says having police present sends a very clear message to those in quarantine. Excellent stuff. Someone else, though, says they agree with the Police Association. 2 people getting out when thousands have been through is not a crisis that many are making it out to be. There are holes and these need to be fixed. But let's not go overboard, says Robin. Someone else says the government's damned if they do and damned if they don't. Of course, it's not a great use of police time, but what can we do, they say. Another escape will cause more tut-tutting.
RNZ News at 6, ngā mihi nui ko Susana Lei ātaua tēnei. The police union says having an officer on guard outside each isolation and quarantine facility 24/7 would make the country less safe. The government has announced that from tomorrow there will be a permanent police presence at such facilities. A third person escaped from isolation in Auckland on Tuesday night and spent over an hour outside, during which he visited a supermarket before going back to his hotel. He subsequently tested positive for COVID-19. The Police Association's president, Chris Cahill, says having officers on guard is not the best use of police resources.
These are police officers that will have to come off the front line, and you're not talking 1 or 2. Across all the quarantine facilities, it's probably going to take somewhere between 150 and 200 police officers.
Chris Cahill of the Police Association. Queensland will completely close its border to visitors from Victoria from tomorrow afternoon. Residents of the state will still be able to return, but its government says harder measures are now necessary. The border between New South Wales and Victoria was closed at midnight on Tuesday, and a 6-week citywide lockdown came into force in Melbourne this morning. The leader of the opposition says the government has no plan to deal with the economic fallout of the closure of the Tiwai Point aluminium smelter. Rio Tinto announced the closure this morning, saying the business is no longer viable. Todd Muller says it was an extraordinary announcement that will have a huge impact on Southland, but the Finance Minister's response to the news was dismissive.
The key issue here is that they have been working with them, one assumes, over the period of the last 3 years. They haven't been able to reach agreement. That's the prerogative of the government, but what's the plan? There seems to be no plan from the Finance Minister apart from see you later, and that's a shame, Southland.
Nationals leader Todd Muller. The Ombudsman's office has found the Health Ministry was unaware of 30 deaths of people with intellectual disabilities in its care over a 2.5-year period. 108 deaths were looked at in the course of the investigation. The Chief Ombudsman, Peter Boscher, says some people with intellectual disabilities could be suffering premature or avoidable deaths.
The particular part of the Ministry of Health responsible for the oversight of this sector of our community was not aware that 30 people with disabilities had died in residential care. I think that's pretty damning that they weren't keeping their eye on the ball.
Peter Boscher says the ministry has now set up a new unit to collect and analyse data, and he'll be ensuring it does. The World Meteorological Organization says global temperatures will continue to rise over the next 5 years and may even temporarily touch more than 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial levels. It says there's a 20% chance average annual temperatures, which fluctuate from year to year, could hit the 1.5 mark in any year up to 2024. Each of those years is likely to be at least 1 degree above pre-industrial levels, with nearly every region feeling the effects. A key witness in President Trump's impeachment trial, Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Vindman, says he's retiring from the army because of retaliation by the president. The BBC's Ali Makbul reports.
Alexander Vindman's testimony in the public impeachment hearings was among the most damning against Donald Trump. He at the time was serving as the National Security Council's Ukraine expert and told Congress a phone call between the US president and his Ukrainian counterpart had been inappropriate in that he had linked US military aid to Kiev to Ukraine initiating an investigation into Joe Biden and his son. Lieutenant Colonel Vindman's lawyer says he's since faced a campaign of bullying, intimidation and retaliation from President Trump.
Alim Makbul with that report. It's 4 minutes past 6. Warriors interim coach Todd Payten seems to winning over his new charges. Skipper Roger Tuivasa-Sheck says the players are coming around to his way of running the side. Payten has a different approach to sacked coach Stephen Kearney, and after nearly 3 weeks under his tutelage, Tuivasa-Sheck says the squad are adapting to it.
You just never know the luck that we get, so it's about just being tough about the reality, and I think that's what Todd's just been harping on about. Just face it, boys, and be tough about it. And that's, I think, what I've been seeing a lot more acceptance about.
After a rare win last weekend, the Warriors play the Gold Coast Titans tomorrow night. New Zealand Cricket has dismissed claims it has offered to host the Indian Premier League 2020 competition. The Times of India has quoted an unnamed Indian official saying New Zealand is the latest country after United Arab Emirates and Sri Lanka to offer to host if the competition can't be held in India because of COVID-19. However, New Zealand Cricket spokesperson Richard Book says not only has it not offered to host, it has not even been approached to do so. Amazon will remove Washington Redskins merchandise for sale while the NFL team considers a name change. It's the latest retail giant to take this step, joining Walmart, Target, Nike and others. The club is reviewing its name amid renewed pressure during a surge of support in the US for issues of social justice and racial equality. That's the news.
RNZ's Black Sheep podcast is back for more dark stories from New Zealand's past, and with a special episode telling the story of statues.
They were consciously designed as propaganda, consciously designed to provide models of service for the empire.
Black Sheep. Find it on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and on the podcast and series page at rnz.co.nz.
Now the short forecast from Met Service till midnight tomorrow. Northland and Auckland mainly fine. A few showers in Northland, spreading to Auckland tomorrow afternoon. Coromandel Peninsula, Waikato and Bay of Plenty south to Manawatu, also Gisborne and Hawke's Bay. Mainly fine weather. A few showers about Taihape and Mahia Peninsula tonight. Frost tomorrow morning. Horowhenua, Kapiti Coast, Wellington and Wairarapa showers today. Fine tomorrow. Nelson, Bulla and Westland fine with frosts tomorrow morning, then cloudy periods about Bulla and Westland from tomorrow afternoon. For Marlborough and Canterbury, partly cloudy, a few showers about Banks Peninsula, clearing tonight. Fine weather tomorrow with a frosty start. Otago, Southland and Fiordland, expect areas of cloud, light showers in parts of Clutha, Southland and Fiordland. Morning frosts for inland Otago. Chatham Islands, showers. RNZ National, it's coming up to 7 minutes past 6.
Thanks, Susanna. If you're just joining us, this is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. It's been one of the longest running questions for New Zealand business. Would Rio Tinto pull the plug on the Tiwai aluminium smelter? Well, today we found out the answer. Rio Tinto, the majority owner of New Zealand aluminium smelters, announced it was moving to close the smelter. It immediately sent power company stock prices into reverse, caused ripples through the New Zealand economy and the Southland region. Business reporter Emma Hatton has the details.
Market reaction to the news. Rio Tinto plans to wind down operations at Tiwai Point and exit New Zealand by the end of the year was swift. The entire NZX Top 50 index dropped more than 1.5% upon the news, its biggest one-day fall in a month, with Ed Glennie from Hobson Wealth Partners updating RNZ on the markets at midday.
Look, as you'd expect, they have sold off quite significantly. The two that are most affected, Meridian Energy and Contact Energy. Meridian was down quite severely on the open, down about 18%. Contact Energy, the other one that's affected, is off 12% currently, down 81 cents.
The decision for the mining giant had been on the cards for years, with the price of electricity from its suppliers a well-known pain point. On top of that, aluminium prices have sunk in recent months. The smelter uses about 13% of the country's overall electricity and is Meridian Energy's biggest customer. Meridian's chief executive Neil Barclay says it's disappointed in the decision and what it will mean for Southland, but as a company, it will adapt.
It will impact our revenues for a year or so, but we've got a number of initiatives that we've been planning for because we knew this eventuality was a possibility. We didn't know it was a probability, but we've certainly been planning for the possibility that the smelter would exit, and we'll kick off on that plan immediately, really.
That plan is commercially sensitive, but Mr Barclay says it will involve enhancing capacity in the North Island. Excess electricity will flood the south once Tiwai stops consuming, and getting that power up north is now an urgent priority. Transpower's Manager of Grid Development, John Clark, says it is already working on an initial $100 million project to move the surplus.
Currently, we think we'll have it complete by early 2023. We need 3 summers to do the work on the key transmission lines. Once that's happened, then that electricity is able to flow into the rest of the South Island and up into the North Island.
Neil Barclay says Meridian will be working with Transpower to get that work finished as quickly as possible.
It's now become the highest priority transmission project in the country, I believe. There will be some additional energy spilled in the Lower South Island until we actually get that transmission completed, but you're talking maybe a year, 2 at most. So I think that's reasonably manageable in the scheme of things.
And while Mr Barclay says there's too many moving parts to know what it will mean for average power bills, Contact Energy, another supplier, warns Tiwai's exit will see transmission costs increase because the smelter has subsidised the country for years. Its chief executive, Mike Fuge, wants Rio Tinto to reconsider.
We believe that there's a good deal on the table. We believe that the smelter is economic, and we believe that there is value in the smelter as it's 100% supplied by renewable energy from our hydros in the south.
Mr Fuge says the exit means Contact has no choice but to defer investment in a new geothermal site at Tauhara and is considering shutting down operations in Stratford. The smelter's chief executive, Stu Hamilton, said earlier in the day there was a window before operations started to wind down in which Rio Tinto could be persuaded to stay. Neil Barclay says if that's the case, it'll be on board, but the smelter's already received its best offer.
We got to the point where we were comfortable, we put our very best foot forward. It seems that wasn't good enough from the smelter owner's perspective.
The government has made it clear there will be no more concessions for Tiwai Point and says it is regrettable it wants to leave New Zealand. However, it's promised it will help Southland develop new economies. For Checkpoint, Emma Hatton.
And the planned closure of Tiwai Point aluminium smelter presents a huge opportunity, according to Russell Norman from Greenpeace. But maximising that could cost the government $1 billion and initially thousands of jobs. The Manapuri Hydro Power Station feeds the smelter that gobbles up about 13% of the country's power supply, and the company's already given notice it's quitting that power contract. A little earlier, I spoke to Greenpeace Executive Director Russell Norman. He says the news isn't all bad.
Certainly is a tough day for the people in Southland, and I'm sure the government will be very focused on supporting them through this change. But on the other side, it certainly means that there will be a huge amount of cheap renewable electricity available for the rest of New Zealand that can drive the electrification of transport and industrial processes that will reduce our emissions and also reduce a lot of the costs on New Zealand in terms of importing transport energy.
It's only cheap if they can get it to the rest of the country, and that's not possible right now, is it?
Transpower have already had approved the line upgrade that they need down there. So they've said, it would take Transpower probably 3 summers to build it, but they can accelerate that process. And obviously, given the situation, I'm sure Transpower will be looking at accelerating that process. So maybe we can't get it up right now, but it won't be very long before we can.
So, at least 3 summers, so to finish the first part of the project, and then there are upgrades required around cables from the south to the North Island, and the potential total cost is up to $600 million, and all the work could take 7 years. So cheap powers are way, way off, isn't it?
No, not necessarily, because the first piece of work can happen reasonably quickly, and then the Cook Strait cable upgrades. The Cook Strait cable won't be maxed out all the time. Obviously, it'll be maxed out potentially at some times, and then we need to look at what the upgrades look like. But there's still plenty of opportunity to get power up to the North Island.
So in terms of getting all of that work done, do you reckon the government should kick in some money to make it happen faster?
Definitely. I mean, when you think about the economic opportunities for New Zealand, think about, we're spending, $5 to $8 billion a year to import transport energy for all the oil for our transport fleet. if we accelerate the electrification of transport, not only do we cut our emissions dramatically, but we cut the cost of importing all that transport energy because effectively we'd be creating our own. So it's really an incredible opportunity for the broader New Zealand economy. And then beyond transport, you've got the electrification of industrial processes. All those Fonterra drying units that are being run on coal currently across the South Island, I mean, surely that's first cab off the rank in terms of electrifying those, so reducing our greenhouse emissions, while also underlining and supporting the Fonterra brand, which is trying to sell to the world as clean and green. If it's using renewable electricity, then that's great for industries like Fonterra.
Okay, so what's that worth to us then? What should the government be putting into making this happen? How much?
Well, if you think that it means we don't have to pay around $800 million in subsidies under the emissions trading scheme, which we're currently slated to do for Tiwai through to 2030. So that's already freeing up $800 million that we're going to be used to subsidise Tiwai. And then on top of that, I think that there's such enormous benefits across the rest of the economy that it's worth investing in the transmission upgrades so that we get those broader economy-wide benefits. So it's a significant cost, but it's
potentially $1 billion, do you think, Russell?
It could potentially be. I mean,
and you think that's worth it?
It's definitely worth it in terms of the broader costs, the broader benefits of the New Zealand economy, because not only are we decarbonising, which obviously we need to do, but also we're reducing our dependence on imported transport energy, which is an enormous expense for the country at the moment.
2,600 jobs. So what replacement jobs would you recommend? Some of the green jobs that have been touted at the moment are killing wallabies, pulling wilding pines and planting along waterways. And a lot of these jobs at Tiwai are skilled jobs with good money. So what could we replace them with? What's your best ideas here?
Look, I think in the first instance, what you've got to look at is that this means cheaper power across the whole of the New Zealand economy. Remember, Contact are on public record of saying they give cheap power to the smelter in order for the broader market-wide effects, which means pushing up prices for the rest of us. So the effect of having cheaper electricity across the whole economy will have broad economy-wide benefits, and that's going to produce jobs in many different places. So
that takes time, though, and essentially in a year, you've got at least 2,600 people without a job. So in the immediate short term, what are the green jobs that we could push these people towards?
I think in the immediate short term, a shock like this of Tiwai pulling out, it's 900 or 1,000 direct jobs. I think that it's going to be very hard to produce 900 to 1,000 well-paid jobs in 12 months in Southland. I mean, that's just the reality of when a big multinational company like this pulls the plug. The government's going to scramble to try to come and support it, but it's not going to happen straight away. In whatever the flavour of the government or whatever its ambitions, there is.
So that's the cost of going green then?
It's not the cost of going green, it's the cost of being dependent on one very large multinational that's decided to pull the pin. I mean, Rio Tinto have made this decision, in spite of being given $30 million by John Key's government, in spite of getting sweetheart deals on the electricity by two of our major electricity providers. They're the ones that are pulling the pin. It's not the government of the day that's done it, it's Rio Tinto.
In terms of the plant, there is the issue of contamination and dross. So what are we talking about in terms of a clean-up, do you know?
Well, I mean, obviously there's court action at the moment where Environmental Defence Society are seeking a declaratory judgment as to the responsibility for the UVO premix, which is this toxic waste material that's currently stored in Matoda. And so that's quite a significant liability. And so I think the responsibility lies on Rio Tinto to clean that up. And then there's the remediation of the site itself down in Bluff. And that will be a very significant job because obviously they've been there a long time. We know there's a lot of contaminated soil down there. So Rio Tinto's other job is to clean up that one.
Yeah, the Energy Minister says it's estimated that it will cost around $256 million for that. Do you have any fears that they'll just want to shut up shop and walk away?
It's certainly been our experience with oil companies, is that they've walked away and left the taxpayer holding the bill for the clean-up, as we've seen off Taranaki in recent years. So, yeah, that is a genuine risk, is that Rio Tinto will leave us with the bill, and I'm sure the government will be looking at every option they can. I mean, it only points to the fact that, you know, when you have big companies like this, you need to make sure that there are large bonds in place before they operate that can cover the remediation and clean up afterwards.
And that is Russell Norman from Greenpeace. It is almost 20 minutes past 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Nationals leader Todd Muller has given a speech at a business luncheon in Christchurch outlining what he says is his party's first big announcement on its economic plan for New Zealand. Called Nationals Plan to Get New Zealand Working, it represents a framework of how it will help the country to recover post-COVID-19. However, the details of what is in the plan are yet to be announced and will instead be drip-fed over the next 2 months. Conan Young reports.
Mr Muller's plan has 5 themes: responsible economic management, delivering infrastructure, retraining the workforce, a greener, smarter future, and building stronger communities.
National has a plan to rebuild our communities and our economy, to get Kiwis back to work, and to deal with the economics and job crisis that sits in front of us as a country.
While a national government would increase debt in order to fund infrastructure and create jobs in the same way as a Labour government, Mr Muller says it would do this more wisely.
National will keep working hard to borrow as little as possible. Out of the 80 billion they spend each year, all governments have wasteful spending that needs to be trimmed. All finance ministers review all spending each time they bring together a budget. And we will do this just the same.
Mr Muller says the exact details around borrowing, such as the level of debt to GDP a national government would tolerate, will be announced in September, 17 days before the election. He says he wants to see the pre-election fiscal update, the PREFU, before finalising his party's position. But he says the debt track of the current government, sitting at 42% of GDP by 2034, leaves this country vulnerable to future shocks.
COVID-19, the trade war between the United States and China, and this city's recent history, that all says that that is not a safe bet.
One thing National won't be doing is putting up taxes, something Mr Muller reiterated when taking questions from the business leaders that made up his audience this afternoon. He says the Greens' announcement of a wealth tax is an indication of the direction Labour would want to head in as well.
From their perspective, what is the way to create economic activity and success in this country is to have a policy settings which are all around redistributing from those who have, from those who aspire, to those who do not.
Audience member, consulting engineer Brady Cosgrove was happy with Mr Muller's plan to get New Zealand working and are pulling back on government spending.
Level of debt, what that means to the country and future generations, and also is touching on the growing welfare situation that we're walking into.
Consultant Charlotte Sullivan wanted to hear more detail.
There's some themes and some generalities, but what's going to be really interesting to the business community is what that looks like when it comes down to the detail, and particularly interested in what a more balanced agricultural industry might look like to stimulate the economy.
The details of National's plan will continue to be drip-fed, with Todd Muller promising to outline the largest infrastructure spend the country has ever seen at the end of the month. Kei Ototahi aho mō te hōtaka o te ahi, ko Conan Young tēnei.
More than 5 million people in Melbourne are settling into the first day of their 6-week lockdown. Roadblocks have been set up on major roads out of the city and the police and Defence Force personnel are keeping guard. Meanwhile, other states are further distancing themselves from the state, including Queensland, which will completely close its border to Victorians from tomorrow afternoon. With more on the first few hours of the lockdown, here's the ABC's Samantha Donovan.
Well, we're back to closed cafes, restaurants, pubs, gyms, beauty therapists, all those things we saw in lockdown round 1. But the big difference this time is the roadblocks on the main roads out of the city and the policing of people's movements in the suburbs, all about making sure people aren't leaving home unless it's for one of the 4 accepted reasons. That's for work, daily exercise, shopping for essentials, or getting medical care or caring for someone else. Many people seem to be fairly accepting of the changes, but some motorists have been unhappy with the delays. A tradesman called Shane, his trip from his home in the city to a regional town near Geelong where he's working was extended by about 3/4 of an hour.
It was crazy. It was they're setting up a roadblock, obviously, for COVID. There's no care taken for who needs to get where in any sort of time frame. It's just bad luck, standing queue. And it's not worries me, but it's a bit ridiculous in this time and age that we should act in that way. Surely we can do better than that. It's more like a communist regime than a government at this point, I think.
In terms of Queensland, from noon tomorrow, Victorians won't be able to enter Queensland at all, even if they were planning to go into quarantine. They'll be turned around at the border. In New South Wales, 13 new cases of coronavirus today. 11 of them returned overseas travellers. The Premier, Gladys Berejiklian, has thanked the border communities for their patience. More than 125,000 permits have been issued just in the last couple of days to allow locals to move across the border that they need, if they need to. Gladys Berejiklian says what's happening in Victoria is a wake-up call, and she's urging the people of New South Wales to be on high alert.
What we're in the process of doing is what we call mopping up potential seeding. So we know that for some time, obviously, community transmission has been high in Melbourne. And so what we are very alert to, especially given the number of people on those border communities coming back and forth, that we want to make sure that we're flushing out any potential seeding that occurred prior to that spike in cases becoming evident, to ensure that there's no trace of that level of community transmission, particularly in those border communities.
And the New South Wales Premier ending that report from Samantha Donovan. Meanwhile, all 3,000 people living in Melbourne public housing buildings, already under lockdown for days and unable to leave their flats, have now been tested. Victorian health officials will await the results before deciding whether to allow them to leave. How do you keep diners apart and safe during a pandemic? A Los Angeles cafe has put up tiny greenhouse dining pods to help patrons socially distance while having their meals. Lisa Bernhard produced this report.
This sandwich is on its way to being served to someone at the forefront of socially distant dining.
So I got a black sandwich.
Perfect. Here's mine. Rebecca High and her friend Tessa Villegas are in Los Angeles' trendy Echo Park neighborhood at the Lady Bird Cafe, which has transformed its outdoor garden to include several mini greenhouses for humans. Each greenhouse, or bungalow as they're called, houses individual parties to ensure social distancing and make patrons feel safe. Like High, who needed a little nudging from Villegas to venture out.
This is the first dining experience I have had since March, 5th, 8th, 9th. So, yeah, I feel pretty at ease, actually.
Owner Misty Mansouri said several customers have in fact told her that Lady Bird provided their first meal out in months.
So the CDC guidelines are really you just have to be 6 feet apart, right? I just went the extra step to make sure that people feel extra comfortable. And then, of course, they're thoroughly cleaned and sanitized after each use.
She said she was inspired by similar models in Europe, like a restaurant in Amsterdam which provides little glass dining huts for parties of 2. Villegas was instantly sold on the concept.
I think this is amazing. This is what I think we had needed for a real long time, and merging that safety plus still experiencing social interaction. So I think this is the holy grail of dining almost.
One downside, despite having windows that open on top, the dining huts can get pretty toasty in the midday sun.
We do suggest to our customers not to come in the middle of scorching hot day, and to come in the morning or later in the day, like after 4:30. They're really lovely in the evening and they're really lovely in the morning.
Outdoor dining is allowed throughout California, but most indoor dining is still banned. Lady Bird's bungalows provide a bit of both.
And that report produced by Lisa Bernhardt. Time for some of your feedback now, just in relation to police being used 24/7 to guard quarantine facilities. This listener says, the question is begged, how many such facilities are in operation in New Zealand? The Police Association spokesperson alleged that over 100 police officers would be required. Surely there are far fewer than 50 such facilities. How does he justify these figures? Well, that is a reasonable question. So I thought, let's ask Calvin. Who's Calvin, you may say? Well, Calvin is the director of Checkpoint, and I defer all mathematical equations that make my head hurt to him. He did a rough back-of-the-envelope calculation, working on 8-hour shifts. That's 3 shifts in a 24-hour period. There are 28 facilities. That means there are 84 shifts per 24-hour period to cover across those facilities, not taking into account, as Calvin points out, that it's a 7-day rotation, you have people rostered off, and it doesn't take into account breaks for meals, etc., and the fact that the government plans to expand its isolation and quarantine facilities. So maybe that gets us in the ballpark of what Chris Cahill was talking about. Someone else has got in touch to say, I go with Chris Cahill. Quarantine is not a priority for already stretched police resources. Someone else says, I was wondering whether the security guards already there could make a citizen's arrest if someone absconded, after suitable instruction about when and how to do this, of course. And someone else says, well, using police for COVID-19 returning New Zealanders, it's a waste of the resource. The rest of us New Zealanders are a bit over having to pay the bill for all of this. It's time those choosing to return start paying for the privilege. See you tomorrow.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. The police union says having a permanent police presence outside each isolation facility will make the country less safe by taking officers away from the front line. Meridian Energy says it will come to the table if Rio Tinto wants to reconsider closing Tiwai Point, but the smelter has already seen its best offer on power prices. The stock market fell by more than 2.25% today on news of the smelter closure next year. And the Deputy Prime Minister, Winston Peters, has had successful surgery today and will take medical leave over the next week while recuperating at home. Those are the headlines. Our next news will be at 7 o'clock.
Tonight on Nights, Alison Ballance listens to a Seal symphony. Mike Price tries to prize the science facts from the fiction surrounding the subtle knife created by fantasy author Philip Pullman of his Dark Materials fame. It cuts through everything, even dimensions.